Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's 5th Virginia Congressional District Telephone Town Hall with Congressman Tom Garrett. My name is Matt, and I'm going to be helping you host this evening. We'd like to thank everyone for coming on board and joining us this evening. If you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Tom Garrett, please dial *3 now, and at any time throughout tonight's conversation. If you would like to join our email newsletter update list, please dial *6 at any time. Again, if you would like to ask a question of Congressman Tom Garrett from Virginia's 5th Congressional District, please dial *3 now. And if you'd like to be added to our email newsletter list, please dial *6 now. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Congressman Garrett, who's going to give us a brief opening statement, and then we are going to begin taking your calls. Again, if you would like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett, please dial *3 now. And if you'd like to join our email newsletter update list, please dial *6 at any time during the conversation tonight. Congressman Garrett?
Thanks, Matt, and thank all of you for being on the call. I would encourage you to reach out to your friends and neighbors in the 5th District via text, or maybe if you have another line phone, and encourage them to get on. Between questions, Matt will come back on and give you the number, but I'll hit it right now. If you want to let someone know that the call is going on and ask them if they'd like to get on and join us, the number is 877-229-8493, 877-229-8493. The PIN number is 116936, 116936. I believe last teletown hall, at one point we had about 13,000 participants. I tell people that would be the equivalent of filling the largest indoor venue in the entire 5th District, the John Paul Jones Arena. The total number of participants in that teletown hall was about twice that number, but about 13,000 people at once. We'd like to dwarf those numbers on this call, so do feel free to reach out to friends, neighbors, and let them know the teletown hall is going on. We're scheduled for an hour. My staff gets frustrated with me because I promise you that in about an hour they'll say it's time to wrap up, and I'll say I want to keep going. And that's all right, because I want to answer as many questions as I can. To that end, some numbers as it relates to 2017. We sent and responded to about 159,000 emails, letters, and phone calls in an office that doesn't have nearly that many individuals. We've flown 79 flags over the Capitol, honoring individuals and events across the 5th District, given 339 U.S. Capitol tours, of which I probably have given 50 or so myself. 570-plus veterans assisted with VA issues, introduced 13 bills, passed, I think, 2 or 3 of those already. Most of them are still pending. Co-sponsored 169 bills, had nearly 900 constituent meetings, and had this is our 37th public forum to include over 60% of the high schools in the district visited, and I think this is our 12th town hall style meeting, in person, via radio town hall, and now via telephonic town hall. The last telephone town hall, we quite literally took questions from Henry County to Brunswick County in the south, north through Albemarle and Greene, Fluvanna, all the way into Rappahannock and Fauquier. This is a really, really neat way to use technology to speak to as many people as possible. And with that, I will open the floor to questions. Now they're telling me I need to filibuster. We don't even do that in the House. It's a Senate thing. You guys tell me when we can open the floor to questions. All right, go ahead. We're going to open the floor to questions.
Yeah, we got you.
It's my job to keep my staff on their toes. These guys and gals are wonderful.
We're still getting them in, so we'll talk a little bit more what we're doing now and that kind of stuff.
You gotta have one question. Give me a question. It's like live TV, folks. Once again, if you have friends or family in the district who you'd like to have join on the call, 877-229-8493, 877-229-8493, and the PIN number to get into the call is 116936, 877-229-8493, 116936. Press 3 to ask a question. You'll be entered into the queue, and at some point, they'll start filtering questions over to us. Wow. Well, we are apparently having a technical issue.
Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize. We are currently taking a few calls right now, and we are getting them in the queue so we can get to them to the congressman. If you'd like to ask a call at any time this evening, please dial *3. And if you'd like to join our email newsletter list, please dial *6 at any time. And for those of you who are on Facebook, you're welcome to join Congressman Garrett's Facebook page at facebook.com/Rep Garrett or on Twitter at twitter.com/Rep Tom Garrett, all one word. And if at any time during tonight's teleforum your question isn't answered, you're welcome to come to tomgarrett.house.gov, and you can contact any of our offices in Charlottesville, Danville, or Washington, D.C., Monday through Friday. Again, if you'd like to ask a question tonight, please dial *3 at any time, and if you would like to join our email list, please dial *6 at any time during tonight's conversation.
All right, I am excited. We have a question. This question comes from Kim, and she, or he, is in Madison County. Kim.
Garrett, I have a two-part question. The first is, what is the probability that the government will close down Friday? And the second part, which is related, is what is the chance that we'll actually get a federal budget?
Oh, wow. Good questions. First question, let me be blunt on the front end. I'm not an odds maker. I don't know if you all are following, but I think the Democrats announced today that they intend to vote against the continuing resolution, which would mean that the second largest block of voters in Congress will vote to shut down the government and to not solve the looming problem as it relates to funding CHIP. We've got about a 6.5-year fix for children's health insurance funding in the CR. Now, I can't stand continuing resolutions. It's not constitutional. It's become all too common. Candidly, it's a pox on both the Democrats and the Republicans. Having said that, for the first time in 14 years, the House has actually passed a constitutional multi-part budget. That is, those 12 separate bills are among the roughly 300 pieces of legislation that we passed out of the House that are languishing in the Senate. I cannot describe adequately my frustration with the process. I will say, by way of comparison, that at least in the Commonwealth of Virginia at the General Assembly, we do business much more efficiently and effectively than this. But I think the probability that we actually get a constitutional budget through the Senate is virtually nil, because the Senate has had all of the budget pieces that were constitutionally mandated to pass from the House, I would estimate, for 5 or 6 months, and they have done nothing. Having said that, again, I don't like the idea of using CRs. I do like the idea of voting in favor of funding children's health insurance. I've never failed to vote to fund children's health insurance. I can't say the same for Leader Pelosi. I think it's very ironic that the Democrat Party announced today their intention to vote on Friday to shut the government down, and essentially in so doing to deny a multi-year fix for the Children's Health Insurance Program, and I certainly hope that some attention is drawn to that. And next question comes from Sean in Charlottesville.
Hello. I'm calling from Charlottesville, and I wanted to chat about health care. As I think you're aware, I've written you several times, and I'm pretty sure you've met with folks from Charlottesville for reasonable health care. We are just having a huge healthcare crisis here. Blue Cross has pulled out and Optima has moved in, and we've seen, for the folks that do not qualify for a subsidy but were forced to purchase on the individual marketplace because we own small business or we're self-employed, we've seen our rates, well, actually everybody's rates, whether you qualify for a subsidy or not, have increased 300%. And since I don't qualify for a subsidy, that has been a huge financial burden, one that's certainly unexpected and pretty much unattainable. There's so many folks that are just panicked, worrying about how they're going to pay for health care. So I'd like to know what you're doing about Optima, and obviously the ACA, I think, is personally an important program. I think everybody deserves affordable health care, but it's no longer affordable. And
Right,
I'd also like to point out that not only are we paying for this exorbitant health care, but that takes money out of our community. And also taxpayers are picking up incredible subsidies. So we really feel like Optima is ripping us off, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Sure, and thank you for your question. There is absolutely no argument that not just Charlottesville, but the region surrounding Charlottesville, to include Greene County, Fluvanna County, Nelson County, is the highest individual marketplace in Virginia. Now, you got to kind of do some history on this and understand how we got from point A to point B. There's been an inexorable increase upward in the cost of two particular fundamental needs in America for the last 30-plus years. Those are higher ed and healthcare. Ironically, both hit home in Charlottesville, as it is the home of a premier state university in the University of Virginia. Now, we saw an Affordable Care Act that was, like so many government programs, the antithesis of its name. In fact, individual plans went up 100% since the Affordable Care Act was implemented. Family plans went up 140% since the Affordable Care Act was implemented. And the reason that you have essentially a monopoly as it relates to individual plan providers in Charlottesville is because the provisions of the ACA guaranteed ever larger slices of an ever smaller pie to big insurance. Now, if you Google search and find out whether Optima and United Health and Kaiser and Blue Cross and Anthem supported the Affordable Care Act, you'll learn that all of those large healthcare providers did in fact support the Affordable Care Act. If you ask yourself, why is it that huge corporate healthcare interests would support a government mandate on individuals as to how they spent their healthcare dollars, you got to follow the money. In fact, if you'd bought $100 worth of United Healthcare shares the day before the Affordable Care Act became law, it would be worth $600 the last time I looked. So there have been one set of winners under Obamacare, under the Affordable Care Act, and that is big health care. Anytime a massive corporate entity like Kaiser or Humana or Anthem or all of the above support a massive government program, just follow the money. And what we've seen is the market for health care be so eviscerated by virtue of the regulatory scheme foisted upon individuals via the Affordable Care Act that you see entities like Optima in the case of the Charlottesville area consolidate control and then gouge the consumer. Now, the reason they can do that is the ACA. So I believe in affordable care for everyone as well. That's the reason that we vehemently opposed the first American Health Care Act that was rolled out under President Trump and this administration. I'm one of the people that helped kill that bill, and the reason is that based on the extensive analysis that we did, premiums and deductibles for consumers would not go down under that bill. Now, the second AHCA, which we passed out of the House by independent and CBO review, would have reduced premiums and deductibles to healthcare consumers 20 to 24% over 3 to 5 years. And if you consider that there's been a 45-degree upward climb in healthcare costs for the last, oh my gosh, generation, if we could flatten it, it would be a win. Turning that cost curve down would have been spectacular. But first of all, the genesis of the fact that we've been hit harder than anyone else in the country by the ACA is the ACA. And the way to fix it is to institute freedoms. Now, some of the things that we've done, expanding access to association plans, that's essentially like a credit union for healthcare where individuals who have a common unifying bond, let's say something like MediShare, which caters to the religious community, or things like members of a particular trade, individuals who work at a particular entity, say, for example, the University of Virginia, can band together and buy group plans, because the Affordable Care Act has destroyed the individual healthcare market as we know it. And so, ultimately, one of the things that frustrates me the most is the rhetoric and the vitriol, where if you don't agree with someone on a certain issue, then you don't care about people. It might be that you disagree on an issue about what the proper answer is to achieve the same outcome. But the reason that Charlottesville's marketplace has been destroyed is because the ACA destroyed Charlottesville's marketplace. Now, the underlying facts supporting the ridiculous rationalization by an entity like Optima as it relates to the prices that they're foisting upon hardworking women and men are really actually pretty flattering, and that is that we have industrious, hardworking individuals and small businesses who will go out and venture and build things in the Charlottesville area. But it's kind of like saying, hey, you're the best worker, so you have to do all the work. The ACA is irreparably broken. What I would really wish for, and what we've done by virtue of espousing the full repeal with a 2-year sunset, is that Democrats and Republicans would all come to the table, acknowledge that the current system is broken beyond repair, and then discuss what the right thing to do is to get affordable care for all Americans, to silo-wise money, to ensure that individuals with pre-existing conditions and high-risk pools have the access to care that they can without driving up everyone's cost and mandating coverage for individuals that they simply don't need or will not use. So it's an excellent question. The reason the ACA is punishing essentially this region is because the ACA is the ACA, and we've seen an inexorable march upward in costs since the imposition of a plan that ironically was named affordable. Next question is from Earl, and indeed I have met with the folks from Charlottesville, as has my office on multiple occasions on this topic. Earl and Danville. In fact, I think we got Earl, do you have 2 questions?
Yeah, I'd like to know your position on the legalization of marijuana in Virginia, and how do you feel about the drilling offshore about the oil?
Well, I voted against legalization in Virginia when I was in the State House. In Congress, I am a strong advocate for the defederalization of marijuana laws. If you read the Constitution, if you understand the role of the federal government versus the state government versus the local government, I can't understand for the life of me why it is that the federal government has foisted a regulatory scheme on something for which there's no constitutional underpinning, right? Those powers not expressly enumerated and delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states, and those not spoken to as it relates to the states are reserved to the people therein. So what I'm advocating for is that individuals in Colorado should be allowed to make decisions for Colorado, that individuals in Alabama or Virginia or Utah or California should be able to make different decisions should they choose to in those states, but that there is no legitimate constitutional underpinning for the federal involvement in this entity with the exception of the interstate transport thereof, and further, that individuals and their health care providers should be able to make decisions for themselves free of the interference of a federal parent, if you will, who seeks to paternalistically foist upon that person and their health care provider what they think is best. We should let people make decisions for themselves. We should get the federal government out of the role of telling states what the right thing to do is. And finally, if you don't think this is right, then look at this fact. Right now, the federal government enforces particular laws in some areas and then intentionally fails to enforce those laws in other areas. Now, I would argue, as having been a prosecutor for almost a decade, that justice that is not blind is not justice. And so when someone is charged and prosecuted and sent to federal prison for doing something in one state and then named Entrepreneur of the Year for doing the exact same thing in another state, you have to understand that there's a manifest injustice. So this, to me, is about powering down decision-making. In the words of Jefferson, the level of government closest to the people is most effective, most responsive, and most easily held to account. Now, as it relates to offshore drilling, I would adopt the same position. I think we need to be very, very proactive in addressing the energy needs, not just of our nation, but of the world, but where governments of localities and states don't believe these things are appropriate for them. The federal government shouldn't necessarily foist a paradigm on those peoples. We've been very critical of how the Atlantic Coast Pipeline has been pushed through while supporting the idea that we need pipelines. In other words, don't ram it down our throats. At least go to people. Make sure you explore the most advantageous, least imposing routes, and empower people close to home. And that's something of a theme that you'll hear whether you're listening to me circa 2003 or circa 2018. The government close to the people is more effective, more responsive, and governs best.
Well, thank you for those of you who have called in thus far. We greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett, please dial *3 at any point during this conversation. And if you would like to subscribe to our email newsletter update list, please dial *6 at any time. For those of you who are online, you can always contact Congressman Tom Garrett at www.tomgarrett.house.gov, and you can follow Congressman Garrett on Facebook at facebook.com/Rep Garrett, or on Twitter at twitter.com/Rep Tom Garrett. And we'll head to our next caller here, and it appears that we've got Joanne from Bedford. Joanne, you are on with Congressman Tom Garrett.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Congressman. My question refers to an article in your recent newsletter about the House of Representatives voted to pass S-139 regarding FISA, and you went on to indicate that you have joined a bipartisan group to advocate for a bipartisan amendment to that. Could you explain what the amendment is and what the status of that amendment is at this point in time?
Well, the status of that amendment is it failed, and candidly, without hyperbole, I would tell you that I was probably as disappointed over that as anything that's happened during my 1 year here in the House of Representatives. Essentially, FISA, F-I-S-A, is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. What we don't think, what we don't hypothesize, but what we know is that FISA has been used to extract information on U.S. citizens, on U.S. soil, already, and that is antithetical to the Constitution and certainly to the Fourth Amendment, that we should have a right to privacy in our houses and in our papers and our communications, that we should have also, I would argue, due process under the Fifth and 14th Amendment. Essentially, if I were to simplify the Amash Amendment, it would be the Get a Warrant Amendment. There was hyperbolic attack on the amendment, suggesting that somehow if we were to guarantee the constitutional rights of American citizens against unreasonable search and seizure, that we wouldn't be able to prosecute the war on terror. I will tell you that having worn the uniform of the United States, having led American soldiers on foreign soil during what was designated a hazardous duty operation, I care very deeply about effectively prosecuting the war on terror. However, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin who said those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither and will lose both. I do not for a moment think it is unreasonable to require that a court provide a warrant before the intelligence apparatus of the United States government is unleashed upon the citizens of this nation. And to say, well, you know, one of the arguments was, well, now ISIS and Al-Qaeda will make sure they have an American on the phone during every conversation. It wouldn't matter. We simply would not be able to weaponize the information gathered on the American against the American without a warrant. It wouldn't stop us from aggressively prosecuting those who seek to do us harm. And so you talk about a bipartisan coalition. It was an honor to stand up alongside heroes for liberty like Justin Amash, like Rand Paul, like Jim Jordan, but also like Jerry Nadler and Zoe Lofgren and Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon. And one of the things I said when I spoke to this the other day was the American people are looking for some bipartisanship, and here it is. There's a bipartisan coalition that had joined together to ensure that the teeth of the Fourth Amendment, that the right to privacy within one's own home and one's own communications was protected, because it has been violated already. And again, I would argue tangentially that the due process was protected. And yet we failed at this opportunity. I really, really, really believe, and you might be able to tell I'm a little passionate about protecting individual liberty and privacy, I really believe, tragically, that if the bulk of the members of Congress on both sides of the aisle had understood, A, what was at stake, and B, what the amendment would and wouldn't have done. Essentially, it wouldn't have curtailed the gathering of information. It would have curtailed the use of that information against American citizens without a warrant. And that's simple. I mean, I prosecuted for a long time. I can get a warrant where I have probable cause, but when the government's collecting information on all of us, that's not the America that I love. That is a different country. I'll tell you that the catchphrase that we originated is that if you don't put the F that stands for foreign, back into FISA, that the program becomes simply ISA, and the American public should know that the eyes are on them. So this is an amendment that has failed. This is by no means the end of the fight, and I will tell you that with great passion and joy, again, I stood alongside not only conservative constitutionalists like Jim Jordan and Rand Paul and Justin Amash, but also people who love liberty and privacy just as much as I do, and Zoe Lofgren and Ron Wyden and Jerry Nadler. So very disappointed, but we're just, to paraphrase John Paul Jones, we've not yet begun to fight. And I think next up is Gail in Pittsylvania County. Gail? We will come back to Gail if we can. Maybe I'm messing up the call screeners. I've got Amanda, and I do not know where Amanda is from. Amanda, are you there? Is anybody live right now? And if so, what's your name and where are you calling from?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Who am I speaking with?
This is Amanda from Buckingham.
Hey, how are you?
Good. In addition to the CHIP funding for the Community Health Center program has ended as well. We thank you for your past support, but what can be done to ensure that the community health centers remain funded?
Funny you should ask that, Amanda. And the reason is that we were looking at this continuing resolution recently. One of the things, and we were, I think, look, I'm not going to claim all the credit and break my arm, pat myself on the back, but a coalition of individuals from both sides of the aisle banded together, primarily Republicans, if you look at the vote totals, to ensure that the community redevelopment tax credit remained. That positively impacts, creates jobs and revitalization on places like Craighead, in Danville, in Charlottesville, even in areas that, Warrenton, but areas that aren't in the district, but right next to where a lot of us work, like Lynchburg, Roanoke, Salem, and we got that retained in the tax cuts. Community health centers are an area of emphasis for us as it relates to this CR. I don't like CRs. I've said that already on this phone call. Having said that, I do like funding the CHIP program, and so we want to get CHIP funded. I'd love to see a fix that goes through 2023 for CHIP. One of the things we're asking for from leadership before we commit our vote one way or the other is that we could try to incorporate funding for community health centers. For those of you on the call who don't understand the impact of community health centers, what we want to do is lower the cost of health care. In rural and underserved communities, we have community health centers. Oftentimes, they deliver care to literally thousands and thousands of people a year in places like Charlotte County. And I was speaking to the folks, and I've been to a bunch of them, and I was speaking to the folks at the CHC in Charlotte County where I believe they said the average per patient cost per year was something like $150. Now, you think about that in comparison to what your health insurance premiums, et cetera, are. And these are comprehensive care centers where you may walk in and get treated for your cold or a broken bone, and also there's a dentist down the hall. And so it's cost-effective care that helps those who are least able to help themselves, but everybody has skin in the game because everybody pays something, whether it's $5 or whether it's full freight, and they're delivering real health care to people in their communities for pennies on the dollar. So community health centers are an example of something we're getting right, and Amanda, that's something we're discussing with leadership as an area that we can fund fully and over an extended period of time because that really is bang for the buck that helps people where they need it most. I'm almost afraid to say who I think is on the line. Is Gail on? All right, I think we got Michael. Michael, are you on?
This is Michael.
All right. Michael, what's your question, sir?
Yes, I want to know where you stand on the Mountain Valley Pipeline. It's also, second part of that question, given the power of eminent domain to a LLC corporation.
So we've been really, really outspoken as it relates to the ACP. We haven't had a lot of Mountain Valley Pipeline questions, but I'll sort of lump the response in with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. I am pro-pipeline. I like it when the lights turn on when I flip the switch. I am not necessarily pro these pipelines. I'm very frustrated what I deem to be a lack of communication. Governor McAuliffe told Dominion that they had the green light. He greased the skids with the previous administration, and they essentially rammed the pipeline down our throats without adequate, I would argue, without adequate information or hearings. I would also submit that based on anecdotal information I received, there are more cost-effective, less intrusive paths that haven't been considered. You'd think if I keep saying this, that sooner or later, Dominion or somebody would at least call and say, no, you're wrong. I've never gotten that phone call. So I don't have a problem with building pipelines. I do not like the way that they've handled this. I think that people need to be heard from. I don't like when eminent domain is used, but I understand the necessity of eminent domain vis-a-vis the Constitution and the recognition that in some circumstances this is a necessary apparatus. But I really believe that Governor McAuliffe, in embracing the ACP and the MVP, sort of said to the people who had legitimate concerns as property owners, as multi-generation family farmers, you know what, I'm giving them the green light and there's not anything you can do about it. So I'd really like to see some more transparency, and I really would like for somebody from the planning process to come show us that they've considered all the possible routes. And again, this isn't the first time I've said this. You'd think if they had that somebody would have come to my office to allay these concerns. So don't mind the idea of pipelines. I think both of these have been recklessly handled and abusively handled, candidly, by the McAuliffe administration and his friends at Dominion. And that's unfortunate because, again, I'm not a guy who's reflexively anti-pipeline. I'm just reflexively against people not being invited into the process, and I'm against not understanding that every possible avenue to get the best outcome has been considered. Look, there's a reality that Buckingham County and the leadership therein aren't wary of this pipeline, that they've asked essentially for this to go forward. Our place is not too terribly far from the Columbia pipeline, but the people in Nelson don't necessarily feel the same, and nobody that I've talked to feels like they've been adequately heard. And again, I would love to see something that shows that all the possible routes have been considered, and the least obstructive routes that are feasible are the ones that they've adopted, and we hadn't gotten that from McAuliffe in this circumstance, and I think that's unfortunate.
Well, thank you for your call. For those of you who are on the line and want to ask the Congressman a question, please dial *3 at any time. Again, if you would like to ask a question of Congressman Tom Garrett, please dial *3 at any time. And for those of you who would like to join our email update list, please dial *6 at any time.
All right, and I believe we have Judy. Where are you from, Judy?
I'm from Wattisburg. Hello, Congressman. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
So what is your question?
My question is, how would you boost the economy in our state through tourism? We have wineries, parks, and historic sites and such. How would you boost the economy through tourism?
Well, I think it's an awesome question because it's interesting to watch economic growth. We've really been punched in the jaw in Virginia 5 with the departure of longtime, stalwart employers. With Burlington left, and Dan River Mills left, and Lane Furniture left. But what we've seen is a rise of tourism, and a lot of that is viticulture. That's wineries and breweries. Nelson County 151 is a neat success story. Now, let me say this. As a stickler for federalism, a lot of this responsibility lies not at the federal level but the state level. Having said that, there is a federal role in infrastructure, and certainly to the extent that we need to make sure we do our job to build what I guess the Constitution referred to as post roads and interstate routes, there's a job in funding. But, we need to advertise what we do well. I am a vociferous advocate to folks, particularly in the technology industry, light manufacturing industry, for relocating to some of the rooftop space that we have in places like Appomattox and Pennsylvania. But back onto tourism specifically, we have the 5th District, and I tell people this all the time because I'm so proud to be fortunate enough to represent such an amazing district. But the history in the 5th District makes it, I think, the best congressional district in America. Think for a moment of this. The father of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson. The father of the Constitution, Madison. the father of Western Hemisphere foreign policy for the first 100 years of this nation, Monroe. Chief Justice John Marshall, who put teeth in the third branch of government. Patrick Henry, all from the 5th District, but it doesn't stop there. The Civil War ended in Appomattox in the 5th District. At Hales Ford, Booker T. Washington was born in the 5th District. And in the early 1950s, a 16-year-old schoolgirl named Barbara Johns initiated the only student-led case to be amalgamated into the Brown versus Board of Education decision, leading a school walkout to protest a ridiculous racist policy of separate but equal in the 5th District. And so we have not only tourism based on agriculture, viticulture, wineries, distilleries, breweries, cideries, but also amazing history. And again, I'm a huge proponent of that. We talk a lot about that. We're actually going to have, I think, somewhere near 10 foreign ambassadors to the University of Virginia in, I think, February. Is that right? To discuss the impact of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution on their nations at the University of Virginia. I think we have the ambassadors from Ukraine, the Czech Republic, the Republic of Sudan, Liberia, Afghanistan. We have a representative of the nation of Iran's government in exile, all coming to UVA, and they're coming because of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. I'm trying to bring a number of my colleagues to Farmville, to the Moton Museum, and we have a bill right now that would honor Barbara Johns as the only student initiator of a case that was later rolled into the famous Brown versus Board of Education decision. I don't do these things for tourism. I do these things so that people understand just how far we've come as a nation, from a place where a slave owner named Jefferson could write the words on paper that all people are created equal, to a place where a 16-year-old girl of courage could change the world. But we have a great story to tell in the 5th. I try to be the absolute best messenger I can, bringing foreign ambassadors to the district, bringing other members of Congress to the district to recognize and reflect on the legacy of the Declaration, the Constitution, and the heroism of a young, brave schoolgirl named Barbara Johns is, I think, the tip of the iceberg on how I can do that. We also need to make sure we fund infrastructure appropriately at the federal level, and that we just let the world know how special this piece of the world is. And Raymond, my notes say Raymond, and you are a veteran.
Yes.
Where are you calling from, Raymond?
From Franklin County, Virginia.
Outstanding. Well,
Up
thank
near
you.
Rocky Mount. I live right from Booker T. Washington.
Right there near Hales Ford.
Yes.
What is your question, sir?
I want to know why it is for the regional office of the Veterans Administration for benefits, they are so lax and so laid back in trying to help the veterans, and then when they do, they put them in categories and decide they're not going to work this one and decide they're not going to work that one, and we've got veterans living under bridges and just all kinds of things, and when you go to try to help them or talk to them, they are disgruntled because they have been to the VA to get their benefits, and they don't seem to be worried about it. And we got 24, 25 veterans committing suicide every day, and I don't understand that.
So it's an extraordinary question, and I thank you for your question and your service. This has been one of the great frustrations that I've had since I've gotten here. Now, having said that, I'm very proud of the staff that we have in our office. I'm going to give you a number in a moment to our Charlottesville office, where we have a lady named Esther Page, who is just spectacular and has worked, I want to say, for 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans over the course of decades. She's not a partisan. She's a person who helps people. But the VA, what I've noticed, and there's great irony here, is I was in the military, and everything we did was built around uniformity. There was a certain way to do everything that we did, and it was the right way, right? I think I can remember somebody saying there's the Army way and then there's the wrong way. And that was just, you had to do certain things certain ways. The VA does not operate like that. I cannot for the life of me understand it. The service rendered at particular VA facilities, let's just say hypothetically Richmond versus Roanoke, or Hampton Roads versus Northern Virginia is not uniform. In fact, my father-in-law spent, I think, about 1 out of the last 2 years in the Bay Pines Veterans Hospital in the Tampa St. Pete area, and his experience was that his caregivers, the doctors and nurses, the people who worked in the dining facility were amazing, and were people who were motivated by love and a desire to help people who'd helped our nation, but that the paperwork process was flummoxing. Now let me back to community health centers for a moment. I believe Amanda from Buckingham asked about community health centers. One of the things that blew my mind was one of the things they do at community health centers is treat people who haven't received treatment in years because they didn't think they had access to it. And a surprising number of those people are veterans who are entitled to care who don't know because nobody's ever told them. So getting the word out, and I know that my Charlottesville office and Esther will have a surge in calls tomorrow, but the number is 434-973-9631. Again, please be nice to Esther. The number of people that she's helped, whether it's Social Security benefits or veterans benefits, is awesome, and I guarantee you that if there's a hereafter, that God will smile upon her for busting her rear end to do good things to help people. And we're trying to seek out legislation that would create some uniformity in service through VA and ensure that things like Veterans Choice are properly funded, because it's a great idea, but if the money's not there, it doesn't do any good. We ought to be able to take care of the people who put everything on the line, like yourself, sir, to defend this country and its interests on foreign soil. So it's frustrating and a perpetual cause of action in the office, but we're trying to get some uniformity. We're trying to figure out what facilities and what entities interface well and effectively with our veterans and which ones don't, and we're trying to transition the ones who don't to the practices of the ones who do. And the next caller, I believe, is Mary. Where are you calling from, Mary?
Is this Mary Dewell? Can you hear me?
I got you. You're a little bit blurry, but I can understand you.
Okay. I was calling because I'm wondering why the bills don't get worked out, like the pro-life bills, life at conception, and there's been multiples that were introduced back in January of last year, and nothing's been done since. They went to the Judicial Committee, and they sat there, and they sat there, and they sat there. And I'm just wondering what we can do as patrons or citizens to help get the process moving.
Well, there's actually a rally this Friday supporting legislation like the Life at Conception Act, et cetera. Here in Washington, we're receiving folks from the district who are interested in coming out and participating in that rally in the office. We're going to have a reception in 340 in the Cannon House office building. I'm actually a co-patron of that legislation. I think it's interesting. Sometimes people try to figure me out. I tend to have a very wide sort of libertarian streak, but I am vehemently pro-life, and here's why. When the founders established on paper in writing our natural law rights, those are rights derived from whether you choose to believe in a God, or nature if you don't, but rights that every person has that they don't get from a government, but they have at birth by virtue of existence. The first right that was enumerated was that right to life. So while I don't think it's the role of the federal government to tell states their policy in certain particular areas, I certainly do think it's the role of the federal government to stand strong to protect life. We literally see stories about demographic trends that suggest that we don't have the workforce that we need. We hear arguments in favor of changing public policy by virtue of demographic patterns, and we've left north of 50 million human lives in clinics, and I air quote that, across the country in the name of choice, and it's unconscionable to me. Again, anyone who's made that decision has my heartfelt respect and prayer. It's not about vilifying individuals. I love people, but I do think that it's important to stand strong for life. Now, how these things bottleneck, it's the same way that any other legislation bottlenecks. There are any number of gatekeepers here. They start with subcommittee chairs who choose what does and doesn't get a hearing, and they go up through committee chairs who determine what bills do and don't get hearings. The reason that the Senate is sitting on something like 300 pieces of legislation in the past House is because they have gatekeepers over there as well. But if you want to inform yourself as a voter, look to see where the bills that interest you are sent as it relates to what committees, and then look to see what subcommittee they're languishing in, and then you'll know where to apply the political pressure. All we want on so many things is a hearing, an up or down vote, so that our elected representatives can be on the record and tell us if they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. So, yeah, I understand your frustration. I share it. Again, I have the utmost sympathy for individuals who've made whatever decision based on whatever circumstance. I don't think vilifying or I hate finger wagging, but I think it's important to stand up and say life is a priority, and that individuals, whether in utero or on 2 feet, have a right to life and an expectation that their life be protected.
Well, thank you very much for your call. This is Matt again. For those of you who haven't gotten to ask your question this evening, please hold on the line for us. We're getting through as many as we can in the time we've allotted. If you would like to ask a question, please dial *3 at any point. And if your question hasn't been asked tonight, please visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov and visit our Contact Me page to send us an email at any time. And as always, you're welcome to call one of our offices in Charlottesville, Danville, or Washington, D.C. Up next, we've got a call from Thomas.
Where are you calling from, Thomas?
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm a veteran also. And my experience with the Veteran Administration has been the opposite of what I hear a lot in the news. I go to the Richmond Veteran House in McGuire in Richmond.
Yes, sir. I'm not surprised. Keep going, Thomas.
It's a wonderful place, and I mean, from the secretary down to the cook, everybody just respectful and everything.
Well, the reason I'm not going to steal your question from you, but the reason that I say I'm not surprised is we get universal praise for McGuire. McGuire is a place in Virginia where, by and large, they're getting it right. I know that, say, in Roanoke, there are good women and men. I will tell you again, my father-in-law spent a year in the Bay Pines Hospital Veterans Facility. He loved the people with whom he interfaced. But why is it that in the military everything's uniform, but the care we give our veterans isn't? I haven't figured haven't broken the code on that one yet. Go ahead with your question, though, sir.
Okay, my question has to do with the DACA. Okay, just a few days ago, the president said that he would sign anything that they brought to him. So they brought the bill, which was bipartisan. Meanwhile, a couple of Republicans, so they talked him out of it. And, all the junk went down behind them. But my thing is, why is it so partisan? In other words, I haven't heard of any Republicans. Why are they not behind? I mean, you send a bunch of people out to do a bill. When they say, okay, well, they're not going to sign it. Why don't the rest of the Republicans back them? And then the other thing has to do with the Affordable Care Act. Again, right from the beginning, they had said that they was not going to allow the president to do anything that against what they wanted to do. So that's why he had to do a lot of executive action. How do you feel about the Republicans and Democrats not working together? And they haven't worked together.
It frustrates me to no end. There's anybody who watched the Virginia General Assembly, when I was in the Senate, I sat on a couple of committees with Senator Chap Peterson, who I believe is from Fairfax. He's a Democrat. I'm a Republican. But when it came to things like individual liberty, search and seizure, expectation of privacy, the idea that before a judge can authorize a search, there needs to be a warrant. Oftentimes, everybody in the committee might vote a certain way, and it'd be me and Chap Peterson. When I carried amendments to bills in the state Senate, Democrats would defect and vote for my amendments, and I would defect and vote for Democrat amendments. And that is rarely seen in Washington. It flummoxes me. It frustrates me to no end. I can agree all day long with a member of my party and disagree at the end of the day, and that doesn't mean I'm wrong or she's wrong. Likewise, I can disagree all day long with a Democrat, and that doesn't mean at the end of the day if we agree on something. In fact, we should be seeking those things out, and the tone of the rhetoric discourages that. Look, let me just break this to everybody listening gently. Al Green comes to the floor of the House 2 or 3 times a week and talks about impeaching the president. I like Al Green. I happen to disagree with him on that. But we're not enemies with one another. We're individuals who should have a goal, and that is to form a more perfect union. And we might disagree on the means to that end. But the days where we could sit down at a table with a friend and argue passionately in favor of an issue or a course of action and disagree, and then laugh and smile and look forward to seeing that person again. That's kind of what made us who we are as a nation, right? I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. As it relates to DACA, we haven't sent anything to the president to sign. But let me speak to it for me. There is an existential reality in the case of the 800 or so thousand people who are here, who got here as quote-unquote childhood arrivals. And to ignore that, I think, is an abdication of responsibility, but that seems to be the course of action espoused in Washington many times. Here's what I will not do, and I've said this to a lot of young people who have been past DACA recipients. We're not going to grant a mass amnesty and not deal with the genesis of this problem, which is the failure to secure our southern border. We need to secure our southern border and then address the reality of people who are here, in many cases, if not most, by no decision of their own. In other words, their parents may have broken our laws, and we should keep that in mind when dealing with them. But the children didn't have anything to do with it. Having said that, the paradigm of multi-family member migration, the paradigm of a porous southern border, which has quite literally and openly been written about as a political strategy for success, that's ridiculous. That's essentially weaponizing human life, encouraging illegal activity in order to win elections. We should have laws in the books we're willing to enforce. So here's what I would say to DACA. In the 80s, we had a mass amnesty with a promise to secure our southern border. The latter promise was broken. So instead of repeating the same mistakes, it should be a this and that, not a this then that. And we'll stand strong on that while acknowledging that something needs to be done about people who were brought here when they were 1 and 2 years old. Having said that, we haven't yet defined what a child is as it relates to DACA. In other words, if you, by your own fruition at age 17 years and 364 days, cross illegally into this nation, you're treated the same as an infant who comes in under the cover of darkness with a parent. That strikes me as sort of ridiculous. So we need to secure our southern border. Those of you wondering whether that means a wall from Brownsville to San Diego, no, that would be sort of silly. Ultimately, there are areas of that border where, essentially without a mountain guide and equipment appropriate for such terrain, you're not crossing. But to provide a blanket amnesty and not address the root cause, which is a porous southern border and laws that we don't enforce, only invites the same problem to play itself out again. And so if you argue that childhood arrivals present essentially a human tragedy, then you ought to want to do something to prevent that tragedy in the future. And the only thing to do that is to control our border, which is an inherent responsibility of any state that calls itself a nation state.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for your call. We are reaching the 8 o'clock hour, and we are just going to wrap up with a few more...
No, we're going to keep going.
Well, we're going to keep going.
We're going to keep going.
Well, thank you, Congressman. We're excited to continue going.
My staff is not as excited as I am.
For those of you waiting on the line, if you would like to ask a question, please dial *3. For those of you who would like to join our email list, please dial *6 at any time. Up next, we have Edward. Edward, welcome to tonight's town hall meeting. What would you like to, or excuse me, Georgina, we apologize. We just spoke with Edward.
Actually, I think this is Edward. Edward, are you there? The last one was Thomas, correct?
Here you go.
Edward?
Am I on?
You are on,
Good
sir. Where are you calling
Congressman.
from?
I'm calling from Nelson County.
Nelson County.
First
which
of all,
is, I think, our first Nelson caller of the night.
First of all, it's exciting for me to see the effects of the recent tax reform legislation, and all I can say is great job. Now, this has come. Can we expect to see any significant action by Congress this year to improve border security?
Well, that's really
I know you just
one of the things. That's one of the things. There's a big fight going on right now as it relates to CR. Border security is one of the things that's driving that. What Congress's role is in securing the border is under Article 1 to appropriate funds as needed to fulfill our responsibility, that is, to regulate travel in and out of a sovereign nation. So our job is to give the money over to the executive entities that then execute the job of securing that border. There's funding on the table now. It's interesting to hear people who watched as our nation's debt grew from about $6 trillion in 2007 to about $20 trillion in 2017, complained that about 0.03% of our federal budget is proposed to be allocated to build a southern border wall. It's interesting to see the conversion to fiscal conservatism from those who are loath to actually secure our border, and candidly, in writing, have suggested that it is because there's political benefit to be gained. But our role is to pass the appropriation. There is a fraction of the money needed on the table now. You literally have had a lot of messaging about funding CHIP, and now I think the Democrats have announced they're going to turn their backs on the proposed CR, which would fund the Children's Health Insurance Program unless they get essentially amnesty for DACA, as well as the future promise to admit all of their family members. And so that's the fight that's shaping up. I am pro-human being, but to allow a porous border to continue to exist only exacerbates the problems that put us in this spot. So the role that we have is to get the funding passed. What are the odds? I think we will. I think if we don't, we're asking for what we're about to get in November. I just can't think of a more paramount responsibility of a nation state than to assert control over its own boundaries. And again, having said that, I favor a robust legal immigration scheme where essentially we conduct immigration like a pro sports team conducts the draft, and that's based on the needs of the team. In this instance, the team is the United States of America. I don't care who you love, how you worship, where you're from, what you look like, so long as you bring something to the table that will help this nation be better. And that's how we ought to conduct our immigration policy. That is also something that's out there. There is a bill right now that we are leaning towards supporting that would end the chain familial migration scheme that would help secure the border. I believe Raul Labrador from Idaho, Mike McCall from Texas, Bob Goodlatte from Virginia are our original sponsors. But there's action afoot, and that's one of the drivers of the current impasse, and that is essentially the Democrats have said that they're going to take their ball and go home if we don't grant mass amnesty, not only for people who are here, but for their family members to later come. I'm not voting for that. And I believe Georgina.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask about fracking. I'm very concerned about it because in our area we rely on wells, and I know they keep saying how it won't affect wells, but there's been studies done in areas where there is fracking where it's shown that cancer rates and things like that have increased, and there is pollution in the wells. How do you feel about fracking and what's happening on the federal level as far as fracking?
I think the federal role as it relates to fracking is to establish guidelines on how fracking should be done, if fracking should be done. But in a stunning display of consistency, I think that the United States federal government should promulgate appropriate and not overburdensome regulations, and then states should then determine within those states what they feel is best for themselves and their people. Again, powering down decision-making on that sort of thing to the levels of government closest to the people who are most directly affected. Thank you for your call. And Oscar, where are you calling from, Oscar? Do we have Oscar?
Just about every call tonight has asked for funding for something. My problem is, what are we doing about the national debt? How can we start paying it off?
One thing that we have done, on the House side at least, is pass the 12 budgets that we're constitutionally required to pass. There are any number of things in those budgets that we like and don't like. Generally speaking, what happens is leadership takes a delicious candy bar and then buries it under a pile of bovine excrement and dares you not to eat the candy bar. I'll tell you this. We actually voted against the National Defense Authorization Act, which blows people's minds. I'm vehemently in favor of a strong national defense. The reason I voted against the NDAA was to address our national debt specifically. In the 90s, there was a bill passed that required the audit of every single federal entity to include the Department of Defense. We just turned the calendar to 2018, and one major federal entity has yet to have undergone an audit, and that is the Department of Defense. And not only that, but the representatives of our armed services submitted a budget, and then the House and the Senate put more money in the budget than the generals and admirals actually asked for to buy weapon systems and end items that our services told us that they didn't need, while we have a readiness crisis as it relates to the number and status of the weapon systems and systems that we do need. And so I'm not suggesting that we balance our budget on the back of defense. To the contrary, I would support responsible increases in defense spending, but it strikes me that we've never held the DoD accountable via the audit that is legally required, and that's ridiculous. And I'll tell you candidly, if that's because there are items in the defense budget that are secret, I'm fine with that. You can label an entire branch of that audit secret, but I at least want to know the numbers. So spending responsibility starts with budgeting. Spending responsibly starts with budgeting responsibly. We need to have reform of entitlement programs. We've got a bill, the Student Security Act, that would not change one single iota of how Social Security functions for people who are vested in the system, wouldn't change it a bit, but would save $700 billion with a B dollars, according to the Social Security Administration, would make Social Security viable for 11 years longer than it currently is, and would allow students the option, at their own discretion, we call that freedom, to choose to delay Social Security benefit receipt for 1 month for every $550 of student loan debt they were forgiven. So we let people make decisions for themselves and save nearly $1 trillion and save Social Security without changing a single iota of benefits for the recipients of that promise that we made so many generations ago. So that sort of thing is thinking outside the box. We need to do the audit of DOD. We need to have some entitlement reform. We need to do things differently than we've done in the past. The definition of stupidity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. And I'll tell you that it's not a fun place to be a Republican and vote against the NDAA. But until we actually open up the books and make sure that the tax dollars of Americans are being spent wisely, that's something that I'll continue to stand up for. So, again, in order to spend reasonably and responsibly, you first must budget reasonably and responsibly. The House actually passing 12 budgets is a start. Getting accountability for how money is spent is a good next step, and some entitlement reform that doesn't yank the rug out from under people, doesn't change the promises we made yesterday, but instead offers different promises tomorrow. These are all ways to do that. I think Becky is next up, and I do not know where Becky is calling from. Where are you calling from, Becky?
Yes, I am from Bedford.
Bedford is tied with Franklin right now, I think, for the most callers.
Out of curiosity, have you read Draining the Swamp by Congressman Buck?
I have not read Ken Buck's book, but I do have a pretty good relationship with Ken Buck,
Okay.
and I will tell him within the next 24 hours that a nice lady in Bedford, Virginia, asked me if I had yet read his book, and I'm sure he'll ask me what my problem is and why I haven't.
No, it's excellent, and I think for the first time I understand clearly why certain things do not get voted on, despite how important it is. So my second question, do you find that representatives are spending too much time raising funds for their parties?
I don't know. I don't spend a whole lot of time doing that, as is evidenced by the fact that I believe the first reporting period of 2017, we were at number 435 out of 435 voting members in Congress in fundraising. That is a dubious distinction that people don't brag about, but some people, I guess, do. Certainly, unfortunately, that's something that comes with the territory. If you don't raise money, you don't get reelected. But I define too much time. I hate that existential reality. It drives me bonkers. Having said that, I'll paraphrase Winston Churchill, who, when speaking of democratically formed governments, said they're the worst system in the world except for all the others. I don't want to see state funding of campaigns. That's bilking the taxpayers in a whole nother way. But it's just, the real challenge here, and I think we do relatively well, I've got great women and men around me, is trying to understand enough about the breadth of issues, right? If you all on the call will think about everything from life to national defense. We haven't even done North Korea or Iran, and I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Fracking, the ACP and the Mountain Valley Pipeline, offshore drilling. It's just mind-numbing. So it's not an easy gig, but it's a great honor. Again, I genuinely believe I would love to line this congressional district and its history from Barbara Johns to Thomas Jefferson up against any congressional district in the country. But by God, and the challenges that face the fifth, we have a district that has really distinct regions with really unique challenges. It is what it is. The fundraising thing stinks. That's all I can say. But alas, again, if you look at our first reporting period numbers, we certainly aren't spending as much time as some people would want. And David, I think, is in the queue.
Yes, my name's Dave, and I guess I'm breaking the tie in reference to Franklin County and Bedford County. I'm from Franklin.
Somebody from Bedford has to call next.
No, this is Franklin County.
Yeah, no, you guys are up. I think it's 3-2.
Congressman Garrett, I want to thank you to start off with for the conference call.
Well, yeah, it's my pleasure. It's an honor to get to speak to literally thousands. Technology is really not fun until it helps you do something awesome. And speaking to thousands of people at once over a geographical area bigger than New Jersey plus Vermont, that's pretty darn.
I hear your words and I feel your pain. My question, I understand you championed H.R. 38 in reference to concealed carry across the state lines, as is a driver's license. What do you think the chances are this will ever become a reality, and quite frankly, when is it likely to be addressed?
Well, I think the House has got the votes to pass it, but I wouldn't bet on the Senate right now. Let me get to the underlying theory here. We actually had a bill that would allow your CHP to be valid in the District of Columbia, and I think the representative from D.C., Ms. Holmes Norton, said obviously the next thing I would want is for people to be able to carry in the legislative buildings. And my rebuttal was I spent 5 years in the General Assembly where lots of people carried, and candidly, I felt safer than I do a lot of places in D.C. But your right to defend yourself is a natural law right, like your right to life, and it shouldn't be truncated by an imaginary line on a map. And I can't, for the life of me, figure out why a woman being assailed by a violent attacker in the District of Columbia shouldn't have the same right to defend her inherent right to life as a woman being assailed by a violent attacker in, say, Bedford. The votes are there in the House. I don't think the sentiment's there in the Senate. Having said that, the 2018 map will put some interesting paradigms into play as it relates to the Senate and the shape thereof. I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm going to get off topic for a second. The Boston, Massachusetts CBS affiliate did a story last week on how 90% of residents of Boston, which is a high state and local tax state, a SALT state, will receive a tax cut under the bill that the litany of opponents stood up and said wouldn't be a tax cut. And so in Virginia, those numbers are even higher. The economic numbers right now are off the charts good. African American median household income is the highest it's ever been. And this didn't happen a year ago. This happened over the last 6 or 8 months. Unemployment is to record lows. We've had 3 quarters in a row of gross domestic product growth north of 3% for the first time in a generation. And so we see real growth, real economic opportunity manifesting itself. We need to bring some of that home to Lunenburg and Charlotte and Pennsylvania and Henry. But the economic shift's headed in the right direction. If we message properly, we have an opportunity to change the complexion of the Senate and elect a body that will recognize our inherent natural law rights to defend ourselves, right? I mean, all people are created equal, but Mary Lou Retton versus Mike Tyson isn't a fair fight until she avails herself of a firearm, and I think she has a right to do so. Tad.
My original question has been asked and answered, so if I could just flip to another one.
There's not a question you can ask, and I won't do my best to answer.
Okay. The current administration has a style and an incompetence that worries an awful lot of us in terms of a model for young Americans. And my question is, after your year in Washington, do you think that Congress can step up and create a professional, statesman-like performance that can serve as a counter to the executive branch's weakness?
Well, I'm not gonna split hairs with you, and sometimes what masquerades as incompetence achieves incredible results. I think we've seen that as it relates to this administration and a rogue regime in North Korea who quite literally sells its own citizens into slavery. But having said that, we work really hard in our office to demonstrate a bipartisan cooperative spirit. Don't believe me, the first bill we signed on to was a bill carried by Hawaii Democrat Tulsi Gabbard, H.R. 1227, which is my bill. I believe has 19 Democrat co-patrons and 7 Republican co-patrons on the FISA actions where we work to secure what we literally should be able to take for granted our rights to privacy inside of our homes and in our communications. Again, we stood up right next to Rand Paul and Jim Jordan and Justin Amash and Jerry Nadler and Zoe Lofgren and Ron Wyden, and it doesn't get much more bipartisan than that. I'm handing out bills trying to recognize and honor the legacy of civil rights heroine Barbara Johns. Today I handed out flyers to people as diverse as Don McEachin from Virginia to Todd Duffy from, I believe, Wisconsin. So this is something I want to do. We did it in the General Assembly, right? And we ought to be able to do it in Washington. But I'm not, I hope people are watching, right? And again, one of the things where the bipartisanship is lost is a rhetorical tone wherein the people who you don't agree with you label as terrorists or hate mongers or people who are out to destroy X, Y, or Z. We need to acknowledge that while I might have disagreed with President Obama on any number of things, there were some really neat things that he did, not least of which is to demonstrate by example to a young African American boy or girl that if they dream of being president one day, by gosh, they can. And so while we just have lost the art of disagreeing without being disagreeable, and we don't seek, or at least the media doesn't portray often enough, to find areas of commonality and work across the aisle, even where we hold strong core convictions, like in my case, the belief that life is an inherent natural law right. So I like your question. I think that's important because it's who I think we're supposed to be as a nation, that we can disagree without being disrespectful. And certainly the rhetoric of this administration has bothered me from time to time. But I think you perpetuate, essentially, the thing that you're railing against by virtue of railing against it. Instead, let's say, hey, look, here's somebody with whom I disagree on many things, but look at what we agree on. And so we try to do that. Last question, because I think at our high we were up around 13,000 callers again, which is a little disappointing. I was hoping to shatter that. But we're down around 1,000 now. Cynthia, and you are calling from?
Franklin County.
Which means Franklin wins the most calls tonight so far. I think we've got Nelson, Pennsylvania, Bedford, Albemarle, Fauquier, Madison. I'm probably missing some. And I think Franklin has outpointed Bedford for the most callers. Go ahead, Cynthia.
I certainly have enjoyed this. This is the first time I've been able to participate. I've missed your other calls, but all the interesting things that we've heard tonight in regard to the right of life and concerning the border situation and the security of our nation, with all the drugs coming in through the border. Another serious thing I'm concerned about is human trafficking.
Absolutely.
And it's here, even though people don't realize it's right here. And I just wonder if there's anything you could say about that serious situation.
Well, we passed a number of laws this year enhancing federal penalties on individuals who traffic human beings, and I say it that way because in 2018, the idea that it's very real, as you indicate, is really frightening across state lines. So we're essentially cracking down on it on the criminal side. The other thing, and I can't stand symbolic action without real action, but the other thing is to increase the awareness. And candidly, your question is a welcome one because your question helps increase the awareness. There was a Wear Blue campaign, I believe, last week that our office participated in, showing solidarity across the aisle of members in support of finding means to combat human trafficking. One thing that I've espoused very loudly as I've become, I think, a real champion for human rights, whether it's liberating people from political prisons and former terrorist-sponsored nations, which we've done, or bringing refugees to safe harbor in the United States, which we've done, is curtailing business interaction with regimes that turn a blind eye on human trafficking. Ultimately, we've said this as it relates to Iran. You can do business with the Iranian regime or you can do business with the United States. Having said that, that same paradigm should be in effect in places like North Korea, where they, again, literally sell their own citizens in slavery. One of the revenue-generating mechanisms of the North Korean regime is to say, take an order for 10,000 workers, send them to build a railroad spur, and say, oh, I don't know, Russia. And then have those workers paid something the equivalent of $2 or $3 a day, and have that money go straight back to the North Korean government, not to the workers. And that is, by any definition, slavery. That's who the North Korean regime is. And so when we find nations that look the other way, I had a discussion today with Brad Sherman, a Democrat of California, about essentially imposing sanctions on nations who purchase people from North Korea. So not just cracking down on the North Koreans, but on the nations who avail themselves of this slave labor. And these are things that I'm well ready to do, working to formulate policy initiatives across the aisle, because the idea that we live in a world where, and particularly young women are victimized, but religious minorities, ethnic minorities, I mean, there's an organ trafficking racket out of China based on the oppression of religious minority groups. This is real. And so that we live in a world where that exists. It's not the role of this government to foist its vision on the entirety of the world, but it is our role as human beings to refuse to lay down with proverbial dogs, knowing that if we do, we'll wake up with fleas. So there are a lot of things via both the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Homeland Security Committee that we're doing. And again, just today spoke with Congressman Sherman during the Foreign Affairs Committee meeting about how we crack down on the client states who literally are purchasing humans from the North Korean despotic regime. So thank you for drawing attention to it. This is something that makes, why am I running for re-election? Because there are people in the world whose lives we can make better by working a few extra hours in this office. And that, to me, makes it worthwhile. I know that I've shaken hands and given hugs to refugees that we brought in from oppression in the Republic of the Sudan. But I also know that there are people who I'll never meet, whose lives will be made better if we as a nation implement policies that discourage the commoditization of men and women and children. That is something that is beneath us as a human race. So thank you for your question. Thank you for your time. We'll do these again. It's a joy and an honor to get to work with each and every one of you. Those of you who think we're doing a great job, and those of you who think we're doing a terrible job, by gosh, we're listening, and God bless every one of you. It's just, you know what? I'm not going to differentiate between people, because people are people are people, but there's something special about the United States of America, and you guys, all of you, those who would agree with us and disagree with us, are part of what makes that happen. So thank you for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening for our first telephone town hall of 2018. For those of you whose questions didn't get a chance to get answered tonight, please visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov. And if you enjoyed tonight's forum, you can join us on January 29th from 8 p.m. until 10 p.m. on WCHV in Charlottesville, where Joe Thomas, the morning show host, will be hosting our second town hall event of 2018.
And that can be reached via the TuneIn radio app on your computer or your mobile device. WCHV Radio Town Hall, January 29th, and we encourage each and every one of you to call in. We do not screen these calls. I'm taking them all as I get them. I'm not trying to figure out what people want to hear. I'm telling you what I believe. I'm going to do everything I say I'm going to do the best of my ability to do it. And that's all I think I could ask for if I were in somebody else's position.
Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening.